In the soft, golden light of Riyadh's early morning, as the desert breeze gently stirs across the newly constructed avenues and the call to prayer resonates between towering glass structures, a remarkable narrative was quietly unfolding. It was the story of a young prince, destined to mature not only within the confines of a royal palace, but also amidst the shifting dynamics of a nation poised for a new era. His name was Mohammed bin Salman, although the world would eventually recognize him simply as MBS. Before diving into the main story, please consider supporting my channel by subscribing, liking this video, leaving a comment, and sharing it with others. Your support helps me create more great content for you. Thank you so much. Born in 1985, Mohammed entered Saudi Arabia undergoing a period of profound transformation. The nation's burgeoning oil wealth had fueled rapid modernization, yet the enduring rhythms of tradition still shaped the fabric of daily life. Riyadh, the capital, was in a state of expansion, existing neither as a sprawling global metropolis nor a tranquil desert town, but somewhere in between, striving to define its identity. Amidst this backdrop, Mohammed spent his formative years observing his father, Salman bin Abdulaziz, diligently serving as the city's long-standing governor. As a young boy, Mohammed's education extended beyond textbooks, encompassing the interactions and movements within his father's court. Tribesmen, ministers, businessmen, and diplomats frequented the governor's office, each bringing narratives of change, ambition, conflict, and opportunity. The young prince listened attentively, absorbing the nuances of problem-solving, agreement-making, and the delicate balance between modern governance and deeply rooted tradition. This early exposure profoundly shaped him in ways that few could have foreseen. Despite the inherent privileges of royalty, Muhammad's upbringing was not characterized by extravagance. His father, known for his discipline, order, and a traditional sense of duty, instilled in him the values of loyalty, responsibility, and resilience. At home, Muhammad learned the importance of these principles, and later pursued the study of law at King Saud University, drawn not to the allure of luxury, but to the intricacies of power, policy, and statecraft. He found enjoyment in reading biographies of influential leaders, often staying up late into the night engrossed in their stories. Those closest to him noted a unique curiosity, uncommon for someone born into royalty, a deep fascination with how nations rise and societies evolve. However, beyond the palace walls, the world was rapidly changing. Saudi Arabia's large and youthful population began to contemplate the future, questioning what would happen when oil no longer defined the nation's economy, and how the country would adapt to an increasingly interconnected, digital, and competitive world. These questions, not yet formal political debates, were whispered in classrooms, cafes, and business offices. Muhammad quietly absorbed these undercurrents. Unlike many princes who follow predictable paths to the military or diplomacy, he chose to learn through immersion. He worked closely with his father, undertaking administrative tasks, reviewing reports, accompanying him to tribal meetings, visiting development projects, and engaging with citizens seeking assistance or justice. He observed the inner workings of local governance, identifying areas of excellence and areas that needed improvement. By his 20s, he had earned a reputation for being serious, focused, and exceptionally hardworking. Although not yet widely known, those who encountered him often sensed a spark, an intensity and restlessness that hinted at a significant future ahead. A turning point arrived in 2012 when his father, Prince Salman, was appointed Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. This pivotal moment reshaped the course of Muhammad's life, drawing him closer to the core of national decision-making. He served as an advisor, quietly influencing ideas, meticulously studying documents late into the night, and formulating strategies that reflected his vision for Saudi Arabia's future. Despite remaining out of the public spotlight, he was becoming one of the most influential young thinkers within the palace walls. Colleagues described him as someone who asked difficult questions, questions that many hesitated to raise. Why must the economy remain so heavily dependent on oil? Why were young Saudis struggling to find employment in a wealthy nation? Why couldn't local industries flourish as they did in other countries? Why was innovation slow to take root? These were not criticisms of the past, but reflections on a future that demanded clarity. In the background, Saudi Arabia was approaching another historic transition. King Abdullah's declining health led to quiet discussions about succession. When King Salman ascended the throne in 2015, the pace of change accelerated dramatically. Mohammed, now in his early 30s, was appointed Minister of Defense, one of the most powerful positions in the country. This appointment surprised many, both within Saudi Arabia and abroad. A young prince, largely unknown to the public, suddenly found himself responsible for military strategy, defense modernization, and regional security. Yet, those who knew him well understood that this was not an impulsive decision, but the culmination of years of preparation. Becoming defense minister was just the beginning. Over the following months, Mohammed became increasingly visible in state affairs. He took charge of the Council of Economic and Development Affairs, focusing on restructuring government institutions, promoting private sector growth, and exploring ways to reduce dependence on oil. Meetings often stretched for hours, filled with charts, projections, and ambitious ideas. His work style combined ambition with a sense of urgency. He acted swiftly, thought expansively, and challenged established patterns, often pushing boundaries that had long remained untouched. Within the royal court and government ministries, a sense of momentum began to build. Some saw him as a reformer, others as a challenger to the old guard, but everyone agreed on one thing. Mohammed bin Salman was transforming the pace of decision-making in Saudi Arabia. And beyond Saudi Arabia's borders, the world's attention slowly began to focus on him. Economists, analysts, and diplomats sensed the emergence of a younger generation of Saudi leadership. The kingdom, long perceived as cautious and predictable, was entering a new era of boldness. On a warm June day in 2017, a quiet but historic shift reverberated across Saudi Arabia. After years of working behind the scenes and rapidly ascending through the ranks of government, Mohammed bin Salman was appointed crown prince. To the world, this news signaled the arrival of a new generation of Saudi leadership. For Saudi citizens, it marked the beginning of a chapter filled with expectation, uncertainty, and the potential for sweeping transformation. For Mohammed, the moment was solemn. He understood the weight of the responsibility that lay ahead. His journey had taken him from observing governance as a child to shaping national strategy as a young minister. Now, he stood at the precipice of defining the future of an entire nation. In his early speeches as crown prince, he spoke not with grand pronouncements but with clarity, a clarity honed by years of studying Saudi Arabia's strengths and vulnerabilities. He spoke of the country's potential, its young population, its geography, its culture, and the urgent need to prepare for a post-oil world. Behind these public statements, a much grander vision was already taking shape. For years, Mohammed had been quietly developing a framework, a long-term transformation plan aimed at reshaping Saudi Arabia's economic identity. He envisioned a nation where opportunity was not restricted by outdated structures, where innovation flourished, where the private sector grew beyond oil dependence, and where Saudi Arabia became a global hub for investment, tourism, and technology. This vision would soon be unveiled to the world under a name that would become synonymous with his leadership, Vision 2030. The preparation for Vision 2030 was intense. Mohammed held extensive strategy sessions with economists, engineers, investors, cultural leaders, women entrepreneurs, and young Saudis. Their insights shaped the foundation of the plan. The concept was structurally simple yet ambitious in scope. Diversify the economy, modernize society, and enhance the quality of life for citizens. However, beneath the simplicity lay hundreds of goals, numerous reform programs, and substantial institutional changes. Mohammed believed that Saudi Arabia could not afford incremental or hesitant steps. It required acceleration. And acceleration became the defining rhythm of his leadership. Once Vision 2030 was announced, the pace of change within the kingdom increased dramatically. One of the most noticeable transformations occurred in the economic sector. Mohammed advocated for new industries, entertainment, tourism, mining, renewable energy, logistics, and advanced manufacturing. Foreign investment laws were revised. Bureaucratic obstacles were removed. Permits were expedited. Digital services expanded, and investors began to take notice. The creation of NEOM, a futuristic city envisioned on the Red Sea coast, symbolized the magnitude of his ambition. It was presented not merely as a development project, but as a glimpse into the possibilities of Saudi Arabia's future. Clean energy, smart infrastructure, new technologies, and a reimagined lifestyle in the desert. However, economic diversification was only one aspect of his agenda. Another key pillar was social transformation. Saudi Arabia, long known for its deeply conservative norms, began to experience changes that would have once seemed unimaginable. Muhammad emphasized the need to expand arts, culture, and entertainment to improve the quality of life and create new employment opportunities. Concerts, cinemas, art festivals, and sports events began to appear across the kingdom. Simultaneously, women's participation became a central element of modernization. Muhammad supported policies that enabled women to drive, work freely in various sectors, start businesses, and access public services independently. This shift was not merely symbolic. It reshaped the workforce and injected new energy into the country's economic and cultural life. Throughout these reforms, his leadership style remained consistent. He moved swiftly, favored bold decisions, and often pushed institutions to modernize rapidly. To many, the pace was exhilarating. To others, it felt overwhelming. But no one doubted that Saudi Arabia was changing. Alongside economic and social reforms came institutional restructuring. Muhammad reorganized government ministries, consolidated agencies, and established new ones to enhance efficiency. He emphasized transparency, digital governance, and accountability. Public sector performance indicators became the standard, and results were tracked rigorously. In meetings, he often spoke about the need to work with the speed of the era, not the pace of the past. His thinking was shaped by the urgency he felt. Saudi Arabia's young population needed opportunities quickly, not decades from now. While many reforms unfolded internally, the world was watching closely. Diplomats, investors, and global leaders studied the Crown Prince's decisions, curious about the direction he would take. Saudi Arabia's foreign relations began to reflect a blend of tradition and modernization. Muhammad emphasized stronger regional partnerships, deeper ties with major powers, and a foreign policy rooted in national economic goals. However, reform was not merely a policy matter for him. It was personal. In interviews, he often spoke about Saudi youth, their aspirations, their frustrations, and their desire to be part of a modern, open, competitive world. He saw their energy as the engine of the nation's future. His vision also extended to technology and innovation. He championed artificial intelligence, smart infrastructure, cybersecurity, digital entertainment, and advanced research. Tech incubators grew. Startups received support. Universities expanded research programs. Muhammad wanted Saudi Arabia to become a destination not only for oil investment, but also for knowledge and innovation. The pace of change surprised even some within the kingdom. Entire sectors opened in months rather than years. Entertainment festivals drew global artists. New highways cut across the desert. Renewable energy farms rose from the sand. Digital apps transformed government services. Yet, these dramatic changes came with immense challenges, administrative, social, and economic. Muhammad understood that transformation would never be seamless, for no nation in history had ever shifted its economic foundation without friction. But his approach remained steady: move forward, adjust when necessary, and maintain momentum. As the late 2010s drew to a close, Mohammed bin Salman stood firmly as the face of Saudi Arabia's future. His journey from a curious young prince to crown prince had reshaped not only national policy, but also the national imagination. The kingdom was no longer looking inward. It was looking outward, building a new identity for the era ahead. By the early 2020s, Mohammed bin Salman had become one of the most closely watched figures in global politics. Vision 2030 was visibly reshaping Saudi Arabia. New highways traversed the desert. Cultural festivals filled cities with lights and music, and foreign investors who had once hesitated were now returning with renewed interest. However, transformation, especially on a national scale, never comes without turbulence. As the reforms accelerated, so did the world attention. Some supportive, some skeptical, all intensely focused. Inside the kingdom, the pace of modernization created both excitement and tension. Young Saudis were embracing new opportunities with enthusiasm, starting businesses, joining creative industries, and exploring careers previously unavailable. Women stepped into roles that had long been out of reach. The atmosphere felt new, energized, almost experimental. But with change came debate. Some Saudis questioned the speed of reforms, wondering whether tradition could adapt quickly enough. Others worried about the economic risks of massive projects. Still, the general sense was undeniable. Saudi Arabia was moving in a direction unlike anything in its modern history. For Mohammed, the challenge became balancing ambition with stability. During this period, global events began shaping the kingdom's trajectory in ways no one could ignore. The oil market faced fluctuations, technology disrupted traditional industries, and regional tensions simmered. The top priority remained clear. Saudi Arabia had to protect its national security while continuing to pursue long-term transformation. As crown prince, Mohammed oversaw strategic decisions that stretched far beyond domestic policy. Saudi Arabia's position in the Middle East, bordered by conflict zones, surrounded by regional rivals, and deeply connected to global energy markets, required precise calculation. The region's landscape changed constantly, and Saudi Arabia's role within it increasingly drew international scrutiny. Mohammed's foreign policy took on a tone shaped by both assertiveness and pragmatism. While Saudi Arabia maintained traditional alliances, it also began forming new regional relationships. Economic agreements expanded. Diplomatic initiatives opened new channels. The kingdom positioned itself not only as a major energy source, but as a mediating force in regional disputes and an anchor of stability within the Gulf. Yet the international environment was complex. Global powers watched Saudi Arabia's reforms closely, sometimes expressing support, sometimes raising concerns. Media coverage often swung between admiration for modernization and criticism of certain policies or decisions. Western capitals debated how to interpret Muhammad's approach. Some praised his willingness to modernize the kingdom. Others questioned his methods. For Muhammad, leadership during this time required navigating both internal and external pressures. He doubled down on economic diversification, pushing renewable energy initiatives, manufacturing expansion, and technology adoption. He emphasized sustainability as a core part of the future, particularly in projects like NEOM, which aimed to pioneer green energy solutions. Saudi Arabia, long associated with oil, now spoke openly about a future that included solar fields, wind turbines, and hydrogen research centers. He also sought to strengthen the kingdom's cultural identity. Museums, art districts, music festivals, and heritage conservation projects flourished. In cities like Jeddah and Riyadh, creativity became part of the urban landscape. The goal was not merely entertainment. It was building a society where culture could thrive alongside economic ambition. The crown prince also turned his attention to administrative transformation. Government platforms went digital. Permits that once took months could be issued in hours. Business creation became easier. These changes were subtle but powerful. They shifted the everyday experience of citizens, reducing bureaucracy and increasing efficiency. Still, the path forward was not without difficulty. As regional tensions escalated at various points, Saudi Arabia had to navigate security challenges with precision. Diplomatic negotiations moved quietly behind the scenes. Intelligence cooperation increased. And throughout, Muhammad spoke about the importance of safeguarding stability in a region that had already endured decades of conflict. Another major turning point arrived with worldwide discussions about the future of energy. As climate concerns grew, global demand patterns began shifting. Countries invested in renewables. Automakers shifted toward electric vehicles. Analysts predicted that oil would eventually lose its dominant role. Muhammad recognized this reality early. It reinforced the urgency of Vision 2030. The kingdom had to prepare for a world where oil was no longer the backbone of the global economy. He emphasized new sectors: tourism, entertainment, mining, logistics, manufacturing, digital technology, with even greater intensity. During the late 2010s and early 2020s, Saudi Arabia hosted major global events: sports championships, cultural expos, economic summits. These events served a dual purpose. They showcased the kingdom's modernization and encouraged international partnerships. For young Saudis, these moments felt like windows opening to the world. Yet, international perceptions remained divided. Some observers saw Muhammad as a modernizer pushing his country into the future. Others remained cautious, pointing out concerns about political decisions. Global narratives became fragmented, varying sharply from region to region. Through it all, Mohammed maintained a leadership style that blended speed with strategy. He held frequent meetings with ministers, pushing for progress, reviewing data, and adjusting guidelines quickly. Those who worked closely with him describe a man who moved with urgency, demanding results but also absorbing details with precision. Economic reforms continued. Mega projects expanded. The entertainment sector grew rapidly. Airlines flourished. Technology firms launched new ventures. More Saudis traveled within the kingdom, exploring regions that had long remained quiet corners of the countryside. But even as Saudi Arabia transformed internally, Muhammad faced a broader question of how the kingdom would fit into the global order of the future. Tensions between world powers were rising. Trade routes were shifting. Technology was redefining geopolitics. Climate change was altering priorities. Saudi Arabia's foreign policy began to reflect these new realities. It strengthened ties with Asian economies. It explored partnerships in Africa. It engaged more deeply with Europe and the United States. It began building bridges with countries long considered distant or complex. Diplomacy became more multidimensional, less defined by singular alliances and more by diversified cooperation. At the same time, Muhammad spoke more often about the role of the Middle East itself. He envisioned a region that moved beyond conflict, toward development and integration. He encouraged economic partnerships between Gulf states, infrastructure connections, cultural exchanges, and collaborative projects. By the mid-2020s, Mohammed bin Salman stood at a crossroads, not just personally, but nationally. Saudi Arabia had changed dramatically in less than a decade. Expectations were high, both inside and outside the kingdom. Critics remained active, supporters remained vocal, and global attention remained intense. But the atmosphere inside Saudi Arabia told a simpler story, a country accelerating into the future, experiencing both the challenges and opportunities of transformation. Coffee shops buzzed with discussions about business startups, gaming studios, music festivals, and tech incubators. Families traveled to entertainment zones once unimaginable. Entrepreneurs launched ideas that, just a decade earlier, would have had no place to grow. By the mid-2020s, Saudi Arabia was no longer moving quietly in the background of regional affairs. Its voice had grown stronger, its presence more visible, and its ambitions unmistakable. Mohammed bin Salman, now the central architect of the kingdom's transformation, had begun guiding Saudi Arabia into a new geopolitical posture, one that blended economic ambition, diplomatic flexibility, and a steadily expanding influence across the Middle East and beyond. The transformation was not merely internal anymore. Saudi Arabia was stepping onto the global stage in ways that reflected Muhammad's evolving strategy. Diversify partnerships, stabilize the region, and position the kingdom as a rising economic and diplomatic force. Inside Saudi Arabia, Vision 2030 projects continue to grow, but outside the kingdom, the landscape was shifting just as rapidly. Conflicts were cooling in some areas, intensifying in others. Old alliances were evolving, and new ones were taking shape. Muhammad saw an opportunity, not to dominate the region, but to recalibrate it. One of the defining features of this period was economic diplomacy. For decades, Saudi foreign relations had centered on oil. But now, the kingdom spoke the language of investment, technology, renewable energy, and logistics. Muhammad traveled or sent delegations across Asia, Europe, and Africa, forging agreements that went beyond oil barrels and delved into long-term partnerships. Saudi Arabia invested in ports, industrial zones, tech startups, sports ventures, agricultural projects, and renewable energy facilities abroad. The Public Investment Fund, once a domestic tool, became a global player, backing mega projects from sports leagues to futuristic technology hubs. The world began to see Saudi Arabia not only as a traditional power, but as an emerging investor shaping a new economic map. In the Middle East, a new diplomacy took shape. Muhammad pushed for a balanced approach, one that reduced conflict and increased cooperation. Regional rivalries softened. Channels of communication reopened. Quiet negotiations became more frequent. Saudi Arabia engaged with neighboring states in ways that signaled a clear message. The future of the region was development, not conflict. At the same time, the kingdom positioned itself as a mediator, whether through hosting summits, facilitating dialogue, or supporting humanitarian efforts. Saudi Arabia cultivated an image of stability, an anchor in a region that had seen too many storms. Muhammad's approach was firm but pragmatic. Encourage development, reduce tensions, expand economic cooperation. Meanwhile, energy policy reached a new level of strategic importance. The world was shifting toward renewable sources, but oil remained critical. Muhammad embraced a dual strategy, maintained leadership in traditional energy while becoming a global leader in clean energy. Large solar farms spread across the desert. Hydrogen projects advanced. Partnerships emerged with leading countries in green technology. NEOM's futuristic infrastructure, powered by clean energy, became a symbol of Saudi Arabia's future-facing identity. Rather than resisting the global transition, Muhammad wanted Saudi Arabia to help shape it. This shift had ripple effects across the Gulf. Saudi Arabia became a central player in the region's economic integration, supporting transport corridors, digital infrastructure, cross-border trade, and tourism initiatives. The Gulf, once dependent on oil cycles, now spoke in terms of innovation, logistics, technology, and investment. But while external relations strengthened, Muhammad also had to navigate delicate dynamics with global powers. The United States remained a key ally, but the relationship evolved. China emerged as an important trade and investment partner. Europe engaged on climate, technology, and security issues. India, Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asian nations deepened economic ties with the kingdom. Muhammad's foreign policy became one of multi-alignment, not choosing sides, but choosing opportunities. In speeches, he often emphasized sovereignty, stability, and long-term vision. He understood that the Middle East's future depended on economic interdependence, and he repeatedly expressed one idea. If the region could shift from conflict to development, its people could thrive in ways never before possible. As Saudi Arabia's global visibility grew, so did its cultural presence. International events, from major sports tournaments to film festivals and technology expos, brought the world's spotlight onto the kingdom. Riyadh and Jeddah, once known primarily for commerce and pilgrimage, became hubs of global gatherings. The country no longer looked outward solely through diplomacy. It looked outward through culture, business, and innovation. Young Saudis experienced this change firsthand. They found themselves interacting with people from different countries, attending international events, competing in global tech competitions, and participating in creative industries that barely existed a decade earlier. This exposure broadened perspectives and fed the engines of ambition within the new generation. But leadership at this scale also brought pressures. Managing regional expectations required constant dialogue. Balancing relationships with world powers required precision. Sustaining economic diversification required resilience. And guiding Saudi Arabia through a world rewritten by technology, climate change, and geopolitics demanded flexibility. During these years, Muhammad's leadership style continued evolving. He became more visible on the international stage, meeting presidents, attending summits, giving interviews, and outlining his vision for the kingdom and the region. Yet those who worked with him still described the same traits: urgency, focus, and a preference for concrete results over symbolism. In the Gulf, Saudi Arabia took on a bigger role in shaping regional cooperation. Infrastructure projects connected neighboring economies. Trade agreements aimed to create shared prosperity. Tourism initiatives encouraged cross-border travel. Economic partnerships strengthened collective stability. Globally, the kingdom's influence expanded. Countries sought Saudi investment. International corporations competed to join megaprojects. Diplomats traveled to Riyadh more frequently. Analysts began describing Saudi Arabia as a rising middle power, not because of oil alone, but because of its expanding economic gravity. But with every step forward, Muhammad remained aware of a deeper truth emerged. Transformation was a long journey, not a single act. Vision 2030 wasn't just a plan on paper. It was a generational undertaking demanding patience, flexibility, and unwavering resolve. As the late 2020s progressed, the world witnessed a reshaping of the global landscape, marked by evolving alliances, groundbreaking technologies, shifts in energy sources, and the gradual emergence of various centers of power. Among these rising global players was Saudi Arabia, led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whose influence extended well beyond the kingdom's borders. The world perception of Saudi Arabia began to shift, moving away from solely viewing it through the lens of oil. Instead, the world started to recognize a nation determined to define its own path in an increasingly intricate and interconnected global environment. For Mohammed, this evolving era required not only ambition, but also a keen ability to adapt. Vision 2030 continued to serve as the master plan for the nation's transformation, but significance had grown. It was no longer merely an economic reform plan. It had become the defining narrative of a nation redefining its identity on the world stage. Saudi Arabia's expanding global role saw the kingdom become a pivotal player in dialogue, negotiation, and coalition building as regional dynamics shifted. Its sphere of influence reached across the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia, and even extended into Europe and East Asia. Muhammad's approach seamlessly integrated economic outreach with diplomatic finesse. He actively sought to de-escalate tensions and foster avenues for cooperation. He bolstered ties with global institutions, participated in crucial international summits, and deepened partnerships across various sectors, including energy, technology, infrastructure, food security, and culture. He frequently spoke of a shared future, a vision where nations collaborated to address pressing global issues, such as climate change, supply chain vulnerabilities, and technological disruption. Saudi Arabia's role within OPEC Plus also evolved. Mohammed emphasized the importance of balance, ensuring stability in energy markets while simultaneously preparing for a future beyond oil. He recognized that long-term success for Saudi Arabia required leadership in traditional energy markets and innovation in the burgeoning new energy economy. Inside the kingdom, the desert was undergoing profound transformation, with gigantic construction projects arising across regions that were once exclusively defined by sand. NEOM expanded across mountains and coastlines, while Qiddiya blossomed into a hub for entertainment and sports. The Red Sea Project introduced resorts and sustainable tourism to areas untouched for centuries. The Riyadh skyline reached new heights, embodying futuristic ambitions. These megaprojects were more than just architectural marvels. They symbolized a nation envisioning a future distinct from its past. Thousands of young Saudis were involved. Architects, digital designers, engineers, environmental specialists, and artists. These projects became hotbeds of innovation, where ideas from across the world converged under Saudi Arabia's increasingly advanced technological vision. Mohammed frequently emphasized that these transformations were not just for show. They were intended to ensure economic resilience, cultural evolution, and global relevance for generations to come. As the country changed, so too did its people. A surge of optimism swept through the youth, who became central to the country's transformation. Once limited career paths expanded into creative industries, gaming, film, fashion, robotics, space technology, and tourism. Young entrepreneurs launched businesses at an unprecedented rate. Women confidently stepped into leadership roles. Social spaces expanded, cafes, studios, cultural centers, and public life became more vibrant. For many Saudis, the 2020s felt like the dawn of a new era, characterized by experimentation, opportunity, and self-expression. Mohammed saw this new generation as the cornerstone of Vision 2030. He encouraged them to dream ambitiously, act boldly, and shape the next chapter of the kingdom's identity. He often spoke about their potential with a blend of confidence and urgency, aware that the long-term success of his reforms depended on their involvement. Yet, transformation on this scale inevitably presented challenges. Global economic fluctuations demanded continuous adjustments. As energy markets evolved, Saudi Arabia had to adapt its strategies, negotiate with its partners, and prepare for global economic shocks. Climate pressures necessitated a faster transition to cleaner energy sources, requiring significant investment and advanced technologies. Diplomatic pressures also persisted. The Middle East remained a region where change often occurred alongside tension. Global powers continued to closely monitor Saudi Arabia's actions, interpreting decisions through the lenses of economics, security, and ideology. Mohammed's leadership style was continuously tested. While some decisions were met with applause, others faced scrutiny. However, his overarching goal remained unwavering: to build a strong, diversified, and influential Saudi Arabia capable of standing independently on the global stage. Throughout these challenges, he maintained an approach that combined confidence with careful calculation. He championed reforms while adjusting them as needed. He encouraged international partnerships while upholding sovereignty. He expanded Saudi Arabia's role in global conversations while positioning it on its own terms. As the geopolitical order shifted, Muhammad articulated a vision of Saudi Arabia as a key player in a multipolar world. The kingdom strengthened ties with China, India, and Southeast Asia. It expanded cooperation with Africa, investing in agriculture, infrastructure, and technology. Relations with Europe deepened through agreements related to energy, climate, and investment. Engagement with the United States remained important, though increasingly balanced by new alliances. This diversification was more than just a strategy. It reflected Muhammad's understanding that the world was too interconnected and too unpredictable for any nation to rely solely on a single axis of power. Saudi Arabia's participation in global forums reinforced this new posture. The kingdom hosted major events, climate conferences, digital summits, and investment forums, bringing together leaders and innovators from around the world. Riyadh was increasingly becoming a hub for international dialogue. As the decade progressed, Saudi Arabia approached the midway point of Vision 2030. While some goals have been achieved and others were progressing, some required adjustments. Muhammad recognized that national transformation never follows a perfect timeline. What mattered was the overall direction, not flawless execution. He continued to push for technological advancement, renewable energy expansion, cultural modernization, economic resilience, and global engagement. The pace of change remained rapid but more measured, informed by lessons learned during the initial years of reform. Within Saudi Arabia, discussions shifted from what is Vision 2030 to what comes next. The kingdom had begun shaping a future where creativity, innovation, and global connectivity coexist with tradition and identity. As Part 5 draws to a close, Mohammed bin Salman stands as a leader navigating both opportunity and complexity. He leads a country transforming faster than ever before. The world watches, curious, cautious, and attentive, as the kingdom continues to shape its own narrative. Yet, the story is far from over. Saudi Arabia's journey continues with every road being built, every new idea launched by its youth, every diplomatic alliance forged, and every milestone of Vision 2030 achieved. History, after all, is never defined by a single moment. It is a long, evolving landscape shaped step by step. And Mohammed bin Salman, at the heart of this unfolding chapter, continues to steer the kingdom toward a future that is still being written.